Hello, and welcome to our short 15-20 minute video on Unit 566, Driving Innovation Through AI. I'm going to hand over to our tutor, James, who's going to take you through the assignment. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Charlotte. Hello, everybody. So we're going to do a very short video here just to try and help you to prepare for your assignment on Unit 566. And the core of this unit is around innovation. However, we're going to put the overlay of AI over this. And as we go through these different questions today, you might be thinking around AI on two different tracks here. So first of all, AI as a driver for innovation in and of itself. And secondly, AI as a facilitator for innovation. So there's two angles here I think you want to think around. How does AI in the world drive organizations in order to innovate? And how does AI help us to do the innovation job once we've decided to do that thing? So there's probably two things here to overlay onto this as we go through. I think it's important to recognize as well that AI itself, of course, isn't a huge trend of innovation itself. And so how it looks today will likely be very different to how it looks in 6 months' time or 2 years' time. So AI itself is something of a moving target with evolving capabilities and impacts. And it's probably fair to say that nobody really understands what those impacts are yet to be. So there's all that stuff in the background. There's a bit of narrative behind this unit as we go into it. Here we have two learning outcomes. So these are kind of sections we need to think around. And we've got 3 questions in the first learning outcome here and 5 questions in the second learning outcome. So let's try and take them apart one by one. As we do answers to the questions here, there are 3 golden rules that I'll just share with you. The first one is it's usually important and helpful for you to define any of the key terms that you find in the questions as you come across them. So we'll have a look at opportunities for that as we go through. The second one is always meet the command verb. The command verb is the first word or two in the question. And the main reason why people get referred on assignments is failure to answer the question in the right way. We'll highlight that as we go through as well, and I have some command verb definitions to talk through with you as well as we go through the questions. And the final thing is to use less is more. So you'll see in the first 3 questions here examples of this where we have reasons, types, factors in the 3 questions. And this, of course, means we want plural. So more than one reason, more than one type, more than one factor in your answer. What we don't need is a list of as many different reasons, types, or factors you can think of. So usually the correct number is going to be between 2, so it's a plural, and maybe 4, 5, 3 maybe. It depends on the question and the context. But what we don't is used to produce a list of stuff, okay? So select a number of different things that are different from each other, maybe, that complement each other, that are most interesting to talk about, and then apply the command verb to them is the kind of the advice. So definitions, command verb, less is more, and it will go a long way to help you to write your assignments more efficiently. First question, examine the reasons for innovation in organizations. So what this question is looking at you to do is kind of figure out what drives innovation ultimately. The command verb here then is examine. Let's have a look at what this means quickly. It's to inspect something thoroughly in order to determine its nature or conditions. So we need a bit of a fairly detailed run through here about what you feel the main reasons are for innovations in organizations. The indicative content is this kind of stuff underneath here in the paragraph below. And there's some useful stuff in there. You don't need to use it all, but it gives you a bit of an idea of the stuff that you might use in your answer. If it were me here, I'd start off this whole assignment by defining what we mean by innovation. So we need a definition, I think, of innovation here to start the whole assignment off, because that's the term which leads everything here. You might, in that definition, want to distinguish between innovation and entrepreneurialism or change or some kind of very similar ideas. What do we mean when we say innovation particularly? It's not just creating new stuff or creation itself. I think innovation for most people would involve a deliberate, effective, ongoing process of designing new solutions to problems around us. So I think a nice definition of innovation would work really nicely here to kick us off. And then once you've got that, you're able to kind of pick apart a little bit around overall, what do you think are the major drivers for innovation organizations? Some examples could be growth, it could be competition, it could be that we've got new legislation coming through, the need to diversify, reduce cost, improve productivity, all in the indicative content here. With the AI spin on this, it might be that competition angle or comparative difference angle is being heavily fueled by automation with your competitors and comparables. So that drives you to need to innovate too. Maybe it's a relative position where if the market's doing something, you can't afford to be the one person who's not doing that thing because you might get left behind. Just to get that productivity really working well, which is never a bad thing, you might say, we just going to have to embrace technology and AI as a facilitator for that as well. So try to obviously thread AI into your answers here when you answer this question, and that should be a good basis for you to continue. Don't forget with reasons, we want 2 to 4 will be enough, but examine each of them in great detail. If you've got any kind of honorable mentions for any other stuff, you could mention that if you wish. The other thing you might do, if you think it's relevant, you don't have to do, is you might, because it says organizations here in the question, you might just want to have a little look at different organizations that might have different reasons for innovation. So, for example, does a public, third, or private sector organization, does a small, medium, or large organization, so different contexts, need to innovate for different reasons? So that could be something for you to think about in your answer here, just to spread the answer out. 1.2, analyze the types of innovation within organizations. So you've already kind of defined innovation here. There's nothing new in this question to define, so that's fine. Move on to the analyze command verb now. This is to break it into separate parts and examine each part in detail. Look at the main issues, and it says also you might want to reference current research or theory to support the analysis. So here, what you want to do is try and avoid just it being an opinion piece, just what you think only. We want to try and build in some kind of evidence around that. So it could be models, theories, evidence externally. It could be you want to bring in some lived experience here just to illustrate your points. But an analysis requires a bit of depth in the answer. It goes beyond, again, just a list or an opinion only. Different types of innovation then. Okay, so again, we might look at this whole difference between ideas and innovation. It could be formal innovation. It could be informal. It could include things like continuous improvement. It could be radical innovation versus incremental innovation. It could be innovation to do with new products and services. It could be new innovation with new market penetration or some market development instead. So there's lots of different ways to think about different types of innovation in organizations. And again, we want to put a bit of an AI spin on this ideally. How might AI facilitate innovation differently in organizations? For example, AI might again be used to improve certain processes and flows and improve efficiency there. That might be one type of innovation that AI can do for you. Or it could be that AI is utilized to help individuals to learn and develop better so that we're able to innovate individually through support through AI. It could be that AI might help teams to innovate better together because it stitches them together and we can use it as a collaborative tool sometimes. That's something certainly we do in our practice. So yeah, just have a think around the different types of innovation you see and put that AI overlay on top. Make sure there's analysis in there though, so a bit of evidence or lived experience would help. 1.3 then is evaluate the factors that support the culture of innovation in organizations. I said before that we want to kind of identify key terms and define them. Culture is a big one though. The extent to which you want to define culture is up to you here. I think in the context of the question, we might assume that it's just a behavior that we see rather than a deep and meaningful definition of culture, which could be a book on its own right, but I'll leave it up to you to decide how much detail you want to go into with a definition of culture. The big thing here, though, is the evaluate command verb. And this is often what trips people up on assignments. And let's go to evaluate. So an evaluate command verb is to consider strengths and weaknesses, arguments for and against, similarities and differences. And then you should then judge the evidence from different perspectives to make a valid conclusion or reasoned judgment. That's the key thing for the evaluate. You have to come to a point of judgment at the end of your analysis of the pros and cons and factors going around the place. You have to come to a point of judgment at the end. And there has to be some evidence underneath that to meet and evaluate. This is a really important thing to get your head around for answering 1.3. What we've got to do is not just identify the factors that you think support the culture of innovation, but you've got to evaluate them, which means how significant do you think each factor is compared to each other? What are the big drivers? What resources do each factors maybe require in your view? What are the main things that undermine the culture of innovation in your view? These are the kind of things that bring a bit of criticality into your answer. But don't forget, you have to come up against a judgment of each factor. So for me, it would make sense here to lay out several paragraphs. You deal with one factor in each paragraph and make sure at the end of each paragraph you've got your evaluation of that factor overall, and maybe at the end of the whole piece a bit of a summary overall about what you think. And again, the indicative content gives you plenty of ideas around the kind of things you might look at for factors here that might support it. But I think it's useful to flip it as well and think, what are the big torpedoes for the culture of innovation? What stops it? So for example, you might talk a bit about blame culture. Maybe it's a lack of people's general ability to utilize the technology, including AI, that's coming through, or maybe it could be resistance to it. So if I've got a 30-year career in one thing, AI is about to sweep my job away, am I really going to engage in this innovation around the technology that might mean that I've got to tell it or the business all my ways of doing stuff I've gathered over the 30-hour career so that I can get redundancy away? Am I going to be on board with that? Or am I going to subtly or meaningfully undermine that innovation of culture because it conflicts with my vested interests? These are good things for you to think about in your evaluation potentially. Okay, let's move on quickly. Understand the process of managing innovation in an organization. So here, this is an opportunity for you to maybe look at your own organizational context because it says in an organization. So perhaps here use what you're familiar with would make sense to put it into context. People find that generally a bit easier, so it's applied. 2.1, evaluate methods used to drive innovation in an organization. So what could this be? Brainstorming, group coaching, creative problem solving, or root cause analysis type of stuff. Have we got the right data around the place? Do we drive for that better? Do we have proper and full engagement with data information around us so we can drive innovation better? So if we're going to innovate, for example, on products and service, how good are we at the method of actually asking our consumer base what they need first? Have we got a decent R&D team in place? Is that an approach that works for us? So again, there's plenty of stuff in here to think about: prototyping, piloting, that kind of stuff, some continuing improvement stuff in here you could maybe talk about. But you want to get into, again, the key things that really drive innovation in an organization or your organization potentially. Again, here, because it's an evaluate and its methods, I'd advise you to pick between 2 and 4 key methods that you think are most interesting, relevant for you, and then perform an evaluation on each of them per paragraph with maybe a wrap up at the end of that. 2.2, examine the process for innovation in an organization. So here you're going to lay out a process, maybe from beginning to end, of how innovation might work in an area you're familiar with. And examine means to pick it apart in some detail. Don't forget, I think a good way to do this could include a visual. You might put a kind of graphic in place to go dot to dot to dot. These are the nodes of the process, and then put some detailed explanation under each of them. To examine the process, to perform a full examination, what you might want to do is have a little bit of critique or commentary around that. So where do we have bottlenecks? Where is it not optimal? Where might we just suggest 1 or 2 improvements, perhaps along the way of the process? Just something light touch to show you've got an examination met in the answer there somewhere. And again, obviously, if you can bring AI into this, that would be great. 2.3, discuss the role of the manager in leading innovation in an organization. There's nothing really here, I don't think, for us to define particularly. We're going to focus on the role that you or a first-line manager perhaps might play in leading innovation in the organization. So here the command verb is discuss, and this is important again to recognize what this means. To give a detailed account, and this is important, including a range of views or opinions which include different perspectives. This is really important for a discuss. So a discuss is a lot like an evaluation, but except you don't need to come up with a view at the end of it. But it is necessary to look at contrasting arguments and views on the thing first. So this might be different views on the role of the manager from different perspectives. So you could look at, for example, how the role of the manager might change from the perspective of somebody senior looking down on them to say, okay, how do you drive innovation, versus the perspective of the people that they're managing looking up and saying, okay, well, are we doing this in a safe way that I feel I can contribute in? You might think around some of the inherent trade-offs with that role. So how much does the manager focus on innovation versus, for example, following the existing process? How do we do that breakup of finding the right frequency between following a process to see if it works and recreating the recipe completely and doing it differently? That might be innovation. So there's a bit to talk about in there. And again, I think it would be helpful here to bring some lived experience, if you can, into this to illustrate your point. What have you seen as being a challenge or a success in leading innovation as a manager, both in your own practice or maybe those around you? What doesn't work so well? What are some of the trade-offs or things that compromise that role? So that's just part of the discussion you might bring in here. 2.4, analyze the role of stakeholders in the innovation process. Here, I think it would be helpful to define first what stakeholders might be. So you might talk, for example, about internal stakeholders versus external stakeholders. They would hopefully include your customers, service users, or clients, who ultimately we're here to serve and exist because of. But for you, you might also include things like audits, CQC, members, owners. So it depends on, again, for your organizational context, you might want to define who those stakeholders typically are around you. And then for each of them, again, maybe in bullet points or paragraphs, you're then in a position to consider for each of them the role they might have in the process. So for example, your customers or clients' role might be through proper engagement to give you ideas for what their problems are, what their feelings of your organization is, where they think that you lack, so that can drive ideation for trying to meet their needs better. Their role might be to give you some feedback about their experience of dealing with you and the current state of products and services. So again, that's just one example of a stakeholder that you might want to analyze. Now, AI on this is interesting because I think alignment is a thing to think about. Ethics and governance is talked a lot in AI. Is the way you're using AI for your innovation actually going to cause an issue for certain stakeholders? I mentioned the intrinsic vested interest of staff who might see their jobs about to get redundanted away. Or it could be that you produced a report using AI and your innovation says this, but it's drag some data from somewhere it shouldn't have done, or that the conclusions of that, again, conflict with some other stakeholders' view, or that the results of the AI produced stuff actually cause disengagement and disenfranchisement in some ways. So there's a bit of skill, I think, in that whole AI piece and how that meets different stakeholders differently. You could also talk about AI's role in collecting these different perspectives from different stakeholders and trying to get better alignment in your processes too. So maybe a bit of pro and con there to discuss. Finally, evaluate methods used to measure the impact of innovation in an organization. Again, here you might want to just think about your own lived experience and what you do or could do or what you've seen around you. Just try and build a bit of practical examples in here if you can. We've got that command verb of evaluate again, so don't forget you have to have an opinion based on reasoned judgment here. And we want to do methods. This is plural. So again, we want to have, 2 methods minimum, ideally 3, maybe 4, which you're going to evaluate in some detail each. So what do you think about the method used to measure the impact? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it too expensive to do? Is it useful? Is it not useful? Are we just going for the stuff we can measure because it's obvious rather than stuff that really adds value that we need? And again, of course, you've got AI as a companion here to think about how it both helps to measure, scrape, and present that impact of innovation to the organization. And there's a lot of potential things to talk about around how AI can be threaded into that, I think. Dynamic KPIs, production of objectives and key results you could maybe talk around. It could be forecasting with AI. Certainly when I use AI on my strategic development programs, I'll talk about the use of AI to challenge our assumptions and lay out logic into the future to test for how we're wrong. And again, a very similar thing would apply to perhaps an innovation too. But we need that evaluation and point of judgment based on some evidence here, please. And that is the whole assignment.
Thank you very much, James. I hope that this has been helpful. If you do have any questions at all, you can contact us anytime on cmi@inpd.co.uk. And we look forward to receiving your assignments soon. Thank you very much.